Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Underneath the Hood with Glen and Dave. I'm Dave Martin. I'm the owner of Martin's Auto Repair down in Central Phoenix.
And I'm Glenn Hayward, the proud owner of Goodworks Auto Repair in sunny Tempe, Arizona.
And we are here changing the perception of the auto repair industry by going behind the scenes and under the hood.
In these podcasts, we're going to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of owning a small business in the auto repair industry from an insider's point of view.
So let's get started. Hello, Glenn. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, man. What's going on with you?
Hey, you know, a big hot topic around the shop is GDI.
GDI. Gosh darn it, is that what that means?
Nope, it doesn't mean that. It's gas direct injection.
Oh, gas direct injection. Does that mean that you can extrude gas from yourself with direct injection?
I don't think that's how it works, Glenn.
Okay. Well,
but one of the things is, and you and I were talking before the show a little bit, and you've got a little story on what you guys have ran into with a GDI car, and I got some things that we've ran into with GDI cars. It's a hot topic right now because there's a lot of cars out there with GDI systems.
Yeah, about 90% of cars that are being manufactured have GDI technology, so it doesn't matter the brand, it's the technology we're talking about. So if you see GDI when you open your hood on the top of your engine cover, or you see GDI tattooed on the back of your car and the little chrome emblems that they put on there, that means gas direct injection. So there are things that are very unique about these cars that have to be done maintenance-wise to prevent catastrophic engine failure.
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing that we're running into right now is basic carbon buildup on the valves, because it used to be gas was injected over the top of the valves.
Exactly.
Now it's not. So what happens is carbon will build up on those things, and we just purchased a walnut blaster about, 6 months ago, because a lot of times you can't get that carbon off with just chemical.
Does it make the walnuts taste better?
No. It does not make them taste better.
Roasting them on the engine? No.
You do not, no.
Okay.
It's harder, it's a lot more work, but it's the only way to really clean the valves and get all that carbon built up.
It truly is. I mean, you have to introduce a method of cleaning the carbon off the back of the valve. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about GDI, what's different about it, and some other designs that are involved in the engine design that have changed the thing. So Honda started this in about 2005. They started this low tension rings, which means the rings that go around the pistons and create compression in the cylinders are low tension, so they make less drag as the piston goes up and down. So less drag means better fuel economy, because
isn't that what it's all about, Glenn? Is better fuel economy? That's what they're trying to accomplish.
That's it, and that's what this is all based on. And I mean, I love Honda cars. They're genius. Their technology has always been at the top of the charts. The problem is, people tend to keep their Honda cars for a long, long period of time.
Yeah.
200, 300,000 miles.
Yep.
And so when they test these cars, they don't test them for 200,000 or 300,000 miles to see how long they're going to last. So what ends up happening is, these deposits of carbon build up because you get more gases blowing by those rings up into the combustion chamber, which creates more heat, number one, and it bakes whatever is dripping off the valves and so on, because they're not getting cleaned anymore, because the injectors now, instead of, like Dave mentioned before, behind the valves, and the fuel's injecting on the back of the valves and cleaning some of that off before it burns on there. Now the injector is way down, equal to the spark plug depth, and as soon as that gas comes out, the spark plug fires, you get better combustion, which means a bigger explosion inside of the combustion chamber in the cylinder, and you're getting better fuel mileage. But over a period of time, that carbon continues to build up. The valves get too hot. They form like almost rocks on the back of them from the backs of the valves that are not getting cleaned off. So the heat, the oil, it turns into little rocks, and then there's no cleaner on God's earth that's going to take that off.
It sticks to it, yeah. And the cleaners that we use, they're really, really good chemicals. But once they get that caked on there, and like you said, it's like a stone, it's like a rock.
Yeah.
And the only way to get it off now is you got to pull some things apart, and you got to get the walnut blaster, and you got to really kind of blast it off. That's the only way it comes off.
So there's a machine that we have in the industry called the walnut blaster. It sounds funny, but it's crushed up walnut shells, and it has a high pressure like a little gun.
Also
that
like a
you-
sandblaster.
Yeah, it's like a sandblaster, and you have to get in there into the engine, and you have to clean off all that stuff. The reason why they're using walnut shells is not only because of they're the right hardness, but also it doesn't do any damage when some of that stuff gets into the different engine parts. It dissolves. It becomes like a powder, and you just change the oil, and you don't have to do
Gets
anything
it out.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
It's-
gets it all out.
It,
of
it
there.
really, when you're done, they're clean as a whistle, man. It really does a great job. And you know, we use the same kind of chemicals. You know, there's Wins, there's BG, they got some really good products, and it does work. But you've got to do it more on a maintenance, on a more frequent maintenance.
Right. So here we go. And I've preached this many times to people. You know, your maintenance manual, your owner's manual in your glove box is kind of like the Bible that sits in your hotel room. We know that it's there, but we never pick it up and read it, right? And so what's really important, though, is to understand and get educated. And that's what a good shop will do. They say, look, you need to have this service done every 20,000 miles on your vehicle.
Yeah, some of them are 15 though, right?
Yeah, some are 15. I mean, some are more frequent. The more high-tech the motor is, the more frequently they need to be done. And depending on your driving habits, again, if you're driving like Grandma Moses down the street, it's less problematic. But when you're down there driving like a normal person or like an abnormal person, or maybe it's normal to see people speeding down the highway at over 100 miles an hour, but
It is lately.
the harder you make that motor work, the more propensity there is for these carbon things to build up and to have problems down the road. So the simplest test I can tell you, take a tissue, put it on your index or middle finger, and go in the back of your car where the tailpipe is, with the car not running and not having just run so it's not hot, and you swipe it, and you're going to see black soot, like chimney soot, on your fingers. That is a telltale sign that you need a GDI service worse than you ever dreamed that you might. But, you know, if you have a new car, make sure it gets done at whatever interval, and we have this information at our shops. It's either 15 or 20,000 miles, depending on the year, make, and model of the vehicle. But once that process has begun, and you start burning carbon, you buy a used car, and I'm going to tell you a story in a little bit about a person who came in and just bought a car and they locked up the motor. But the deal is, this GDI service is detectable. You don't have to have a scan tool. A scan tool won't tell you need a GDI service.
No, it won't.
Your odometer will, but this foolproof method, if you want to put a glove on just make sure it's not a black glove, because the soot you're going to see is black. But I just say, take a Kleenex, wrap it around your fingers, put it in the tailpipe, and just take a swipe. If you see black soot on there, especially if it's flaky, you will have a serious problem with blow-by in your vehicle.
Well, and not only blow-by, one of the things that we didn't even really talk about is it'll cause a misfire, and it cause your car to run rough, and then the engine light will come on, and then the worst thing that can happen after that is you can ruin your catalytic converter, because running raw fuel down in the
Which is
converter
another
just destroys it.
$1,000 to $2,000 depending on the kind of vehicle you have. Some are $3,000.
Yeah, we just had a car in our shop about a month ago that came in with a misfire. We went ahead and got the misfire taken care of, and about 2 weeks later, the converter code came up.
Yeah, it plugs up the catalytic converter. Catalytic converter, part of your exhaust. Everyone's heard of them. It's like a 3D screen. You can manage a three-dimensional screen, and it's got some really expensive
Metals in it.
Metals in it.
Yeah.
And minerals and metals in it. And once you plug that thing up and the exhaust can't get through, it creates bad pressure inside, back pressure actually into your engine. Not only that, but the sensors that are on the oxygen sensors are saying this catalytic converter is not completing its function. Check engine light comes on, and in most cases you can't save the catalytic converter, you can't clean them, so you end up having to replace them. And they're very expensive, and you can't do it in your backyard.
No, absolutely not. And you need to replace it with a quality converter. Put a cheap converter in there, it's going to last for a year if you're lucky, and you're going to be right back where you were.
Yeah, and our warranty is longer than that, so for us to put a cheap catalytic converter on is not in anyone's best interest.
Not at all. So, Glenn, tell us about the story about the GDI.
Wow. So a young man purchased a car, he and his father, and this car looked gorgeous. I mean, it was all painted up and detailed out, new tires. Yeah.
Did they get a pre-purchase inspection?
Well, absolutely did not. And that's what leads us to this whole episode, is because people look at something, They look at the new tires. They clean the engine compartment. And I did a story.
Little
about
armor all
this.
goes a long ways, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And so it was eye candy. The car seemed to run nice. The check engine light wasn't on. And within 4 days of him purchasing the car, the engine completely locked up on it.
Wow.
And I mean locked up. He had to pull off the road, get his car towed in here. Cost him a ton of money just for the towing and the inconvenience and all this other stuff. Gets the car in here, says, hey, the car won't start. The starter engages, but it won't turn the motor over. So they had it towed here. Come in here, we put a big bar on the crankshaft, a big ratchet with the socket, and we couldn't turn the motor.
Wow.
You could watch the engine just move a couple centimeters every time you hit the starter instead of cranking full crank. So we call the customer up, the father, and we says, hey, this vehicle needs a motor. The motor's locked up. And he's like in shock. Like, how could that happen? We just bought the car 4 days ago. How could this engine be locked up? The engine was already 2 quarts low on oil. And of course, I took the oil filter off and I did a little video reel in my shop here, and you can see metal just pouring out of this oil filter. It looked like glitter.
Wow.
And this motor had already been, deeply damaged before this young man bought the vehicle. So, unfortunately, the father may have thought, well, what the heck were you doing with this car? Were you drag racing or what were you doing?
Right, yeah.
No, this was a GDI car with 137,000 miles on it. Now that for today's vehicle,
It's
that's
not that much,
That's
yeah.
not a ton of miles,
Yeah.
But had a pre-purchase inspection been done, when even pulling the dipstick, there's glitter on the dipstick. That's
Yeah.
a good sign that, hey, there's problems with this internal engine. Don't buy this car.
Right.
Let the next sucker buy this car, not you. So, long story short, they agreed to have the motor put in. By the time the whole thing was done and all the parts were switched over and the engine was purchased and installed, $4,700 later, we put another engine in this vehicle and got it all squared away.
Well, yeah, and the moral of the story is one of the things that you kind of alluded to is that, yeah, we can't see inside your engine per se, and we can't see inside your transmission to see if everything is worn or ready to break or whatever. But what you said was there's some simple tricks that we use, like pulling the dipstick out and just taking a good...
Well, guess what? Some cars don't have a dipstick in the
There's-
engine or the transmission.
Right.
So you have to open up some, plugs somewhere and get some of those fluid samples out. That's why it's so important. You're not going to crawl into your car and say, oh, gee, which plug do I remove? And you remove the wrong one, and something terrible happens because you just misadjusted your transmission bands or something. I mean, you got to know what you're doing. I can guarantee you there's hardly a transmission left on the earth that has a dipstick in it, and many automotive engines don't even have a dipstick on the high-end cars. They don't want you messing. They got a level sensor inside of the pan that tells you how much oil's left.
Right. Right. Well, and you do a lot of the cars with a scan tool.
Yeah.
That's kind of they're getting away from the dipsticks,
Because
but
they don't want people messing with their own cars. They
but-
want you to bring it to them.
but there is like you mentioned though, there is some tricks and some things that we just look for. We just look for those things, and in this case, this guy probably would have saved himself a ton of money if he would have just had the pre-purchase inspection done.
Right. And I actually took the father out after they came to pick up the car yesterday, and I says, well, here's the telltale sign. It says, and if you ever buy another car, especially with the GDI motor, which is almost inevitable now, is here. And I swiped the tailpipe with my fingers. I said, you see this? He says, oh, my God.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe the amount of soot that was still in that. And, and it eventually will burn out because it's got a different motor in there now. But I said, this is it. This is all you got to do to see if your car's burning oil or if a car you're about to buy. There's other things that need to be checked in a pre-purchase inspection. But, man, if this can prevent you from buying a motor that's about to blow up,
Yeah.
that's the biggest expense.
There's no doubt about it. And with these GDI cars, the main thing is maintenance. I guess that's the goal that that's what we're trying to educate the consumer on, is to make sure that they do the maintenance so they don't end up having a misfire, don't have bad engine, they don't have breakdowns, or they don't have to spend a ton of money. if you just do the regular service on a regular basis, you probably won't ever have to get your valves walnut blasted.
Right. Another thing that's really important to understand is that plastics are being used all over the engines for the cooling systems, oiling systems. And these things, again, if you're neglecting changing your antifreeze with a much greater frequency than ever before, the seals, the heat, all of the things that are involved, plastics cannot take as much heat as metals.
They warp and
So
there's all kinds of problems
They
there.
used aluminum and steel and things before. Now it's plastic. So that part of your vehicle that's being attached to your vehicle, that's moving coolant and everything, plastic lines everywhere, going from one end of the engine compartment to the other that are cracking and breaking. Those things, all of that really boils down to, are you changing your antifreeze as often as you do? Now the intervals are down to like 60 or 70,000 miles. It used to be 100,000, 120,000 miles. The hoses are being made out of, in many cases, subpar materials, and they do not last as long as they used to back in the day.
Well, and one more thing I want to say before we end this podcast is that when you find a shop that is educated, that understands, that has the technology and has the ability to do everything on your car, and stick with them. Because here's what happens in a lot of cases, and we've seen this happen before, where people will go to 3 or 4 different shops in a year, and whatever, they either underservice the car or overservice the car. And either way, it's not good for the consumer, because either if they overservice the car, the consumers paying more money than they need to, and if they're underservicing the car, in the long run, it's going to hurt them because they're going to end up paying more money to fix the car when they could have done the maintenance and saved themselves a ton of money.
Well, people assume, a lot of things when they go to a shop, even for a quick oil change place. There's these new 5-minute places. They get guaranteed to get you, and you sit in your car, you drive through, 5 minutes later you're out the door and your oil's changed. They couldn't possibly inspect anything. You're lucky if they can get the drain plug in 5 minutes and spin the filter on and fill it with oil. And they don't even take the drain plug out. They suck the oil out, which leaves some in the pan. They can't inspect the condition of the oil. They just put these tubes in there, suck the oil out, spin a filter on, fill it up, and say, thank you for your business. And what got checked on your car? They're not checking your tire pressure, the condition of your brakes, other fluids in the vehicle. None of that's getting checked. They don't have time in 5 minutes.
Right, absolutely. And my daughter, she has a Kia, and she just got a deal a little while back. I should say it's probably been a year ago, on a software update, because the engines are going bad in those cars. They're having a problem with the engines. So what's happening is they want you to do this update, which is supposed to save the motor, and whether it does or not, the jury's still out on that. But the point is if you don't do the update on the software, they won't warranty the engine. So in some cases, you can get the manufacturer, if they've got some sort of a recall or some sort of a problem, that you can get the engine warranted.
Yeah, it was interesting. My scrap guy came the other day, Larry Darrow, came in just at the time we had gotten this motor out of this thing. He says, oh, there's another one. He says, do you realize, he says, I have picked up over 3,000 of these motors from dealerships that have been locked up, blown, and replaced. Just him, one scrap guy. And I'm like, oh my God, that's an amazing amount of scrap motors that Hyundai and Kia and some other companies have had to replace under warranty. They got the best warranty, 100,000 miles on their drivetrain.
And it was extended too. I think they were doing them even over 100,000 but if you had to do the software update, that was the key.
Yeah.
So
we're going to wrap this up for today, but it's a buyer beware world. That's really important to understand, and having a great shop. And we're not the only 2 great shops in this city or any other city, but look for a shop with a great reputation and that's been in business for a long time, and they have the techs and the technology and the reputation. They're going to take great care of your car for you.
Right. And I hope we educated you a little bit on GDI, and have a great day, Glenn.
You too.
Bye. Bye.